Hello everyone, you're watching News Track with me, Maria Shakeel. India's premier university, the Jawaharlal Nehru University, is in the news again and for the wrong reasons. Just hours after bail was denied to Umar, Khalid and Sharjeel Imam, protests broke out at the JNU, reigniting an old but unresolved debate. Slogans raised after a judicial order have once again pushed campuses into the national spotlight, triggering a fresh political storm over free speech, nationalism and the limits of protest. Supporters call it the language of resistance. Critics see it as a challenge to constitutional authority. From the Supreme Court to the university campus, the political ripple effect is unmistakable. Where does dissent end and where does it cross into defiance of the law? We'll be putting that question to two legal voices from both the sides of the political spectrum who will be joining me shortly. But first up, here's what happened.
You have been accused of sedition in the very right case, and now this one.
Sharjeel, कुछ बोलोगे?
JNU is once again at the center of a political storm. Just hours after the Supreme Court denied bail to Umar, Khalid and Sharjeel Imam, purported videos surfaced from the Jawaharlal Nehru University campus. These clips allegedly show students raising controversial slogans against Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Home Minister Amit Shah. The protest was organized to oppose the Supreme Court's refusal to grant bail to Umar, Khalid and Sharjeel Imam, while also commemorating 6 years since the 2020 campus attack. What began as sloganeering on campus soon escalated into a full-blown political flashpoint. The JNU administration filed a complaint at the Vasant Kunj police station, naming JNU Students' Union President Aditi Mishra, Vice President Gopika Babu, and several other students. In a strongly worded statement, the Jawaharlal Nehru University administration vowed the strictest disciplinary action against the students, claiming that students found involved could face suspension, expulsion, or even permanent debarment. The BJP quickly seized on the episode, branding the protesters as urban Naxals and reiterating its claim that extremism can exist even among so-called intellectuals, including doctors and engineers.
सरकार का व्यक्तिगत माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी के खिलाफ जो बयान देते हैं, उसका हर बार उनको भुगतान मिला है, जनता ने जवाब दिया है। मुझे पूरा विश्वास है भारत की जनता इस प्रकार के विवादित बयान और धमकियों से डरती भी नहीं है।
The Students' Union, however, has hit back strongly, claiming that the controversy is a deliberate attempt to mischaracterize a vigil and deflect attention from real issues. It called the episode a slander and an organized effort to defame JNU, asserting its democratic and constitutional right to dissent. The Congress has come out in support of the students, while the CPM struck a more cautious note, urging restraint in the choice of slogans.
खैर ये तो ये नारा है और एक विरोध करने का तरीका है, एक पॉलिटिकल लैंग्वेज है, इसको लिटरल मतलब नहीं कहते हैं और जेएनयू में काफ़ी इसका आक्रोश है।
This is not the first time JNU has found itself in the national spotlight. From the 2016 Sedition row to repeated clashes over ideology and dissent, the campus has long remained a lightning rod for controversy. As As investigations begin and political lines harden, yet another campus protest has spilled into a national debate. Once again, pushing JNU to the center of India's ideological battleground. Bureau Report, India Today.
To unpack the legal, constitutional and institutional implications of this moment, I am being joined by one of India's topmost constitutional expert, former Solicitor General of India, Mr. Harish Salve joins me. Mr. Salve, I really appreciate your time here on India Today. You have previously stated that context and course of conduct are crucial in such cases beyond isolated speeches. In light of the JNU sloganeering post the verdict, does this really validate the prosecution's narrative of orchestrated anti-national activism on campuses?
See, there is, it's worrisome because it brings to fore what kind of hate laboratories are being run in our universities. I mean, we taxpayers pay for these universities, you know, and it is not for our children to be taught these kind of values. You may have your differences with the Prime Minister, with the Home Minister, you may disagree with the government. We used to also, I remember in 70s, we used to have sharp disagreements with Mrs. Gandhi's government when we were in college, but nobody ever used this kind of expressions. Even the students' protests in emergency time never used these kind of expressions when the whole opposition was locked up. There is something which has vitiated the atmosphere and brought this kind of vocabulary into the discourse in universities. And I think that is a very serious matter which needs to be considered. See, today's warfare in the present situation is very different from the warfare of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Today is information warfare. Our neighboring country feeds into this narrative because they cannot take India on. So you have physical terrorism by terrorists crossing over and committing incidents. And then you have intellectual terrorism by feeding this kind of narrative to our children and bringing them into such a state of mind that these innocent youngsters who should otherwise be studying are wasting their time and getting converted into these kind of negative, I mean, I'm also tempted to use the expression urban Naxalites. And this, you're creating a generation or you're creating a group of people who can be, who misguided they may be, but they can create trouble for the country as we go on. Okay. So we need to put this down firmly.
Okay.
Now, contempt of Supreme Court, etc., is not something which I think may be the solution. But something needs to be done to fix this because this happens, it's been happening once too often in this university.
Okay, but Mr. Salve, are you really seeing this as a contempt of the Supreme Court?
There's no contempt of Supreme Court. And whenever one talks of contempt of Supreme Court, I'm reminded of what Lord Denning used to say, you know, the power of contempt is not to protect the dignity of the judges. He said that must rest on stronger foundations. If these youngsters are saying Supreme Court is right or wrong or something, that only shows their mindset. I haven't seen what they said. If somebody has said that the Supreme Court has acted corruptly or has taken a bribe or is partisan, then that may be another matter. If motives are being cast for the Supreme Court judgment. But then again, whether or not contempt is the way out is something which is not the best course. I think first of all, the university authorities have to deal with this firmly, very firmly. Secondly, the police, if necessary, the police has to deal with this. But this is a campus problem. Campus problems have been there from the time, I mean, I'm now almost 70 years old. I've seen campus problems for the last 55 years. So campus problems are nothing new. Campus problems have to be dealt with, first of all, in the campus. And I think this campus has become a hornet's nest And this needs to be sorted out first. And then, of course, if it has reached a point where the police feel that this is growing beyond mere campus nonsense and is spreading further, it has to be dealt with firmly.
Okay, since you say that this is a campus problem, what would you tell those who would say that here is a university curtailing the liberty of its own students? Surely, Mr. Salve, a university cannot be a monastery.
No, it's not a monastery, but I must also tell you, as we say, what's the extent of your fundamental right? Your right to swing your hand ends where my nose begins, okay? So you must realize all rights have limitations. You cannot, nobody has a fundamental right to say, I will dig a grave for the Prime Minister and I'll dig a grave for the Home Minister. And if this is the kind of vocabulary which has come in, it's a mindset which has come in. And these are not isolated incidents. This is becoming a hate factory, this university. Repeatedly, I have heard, and I'd be delighted if I have got a wrong impression, but I believe they have come up with slogans which says India should be Bharat tere tukde honge. Somebody had sent me a tape of they saying Punjab mange azadi, ye mange azadi, wo state mange azadi. What is the education which is being imparted to these people? See, universities are not meant to be a taxpayer-funded establishment for a particular political ideology to be fed to students. And if that is what is going on, we need to have a serious look at what's going on in this university.
Okay, then what implications does this denial of bail have for judicial handling of free speech versus sedition in student activism, especially drawing parallels to the original event, which had Umar, Khalid and Sharjeel Imam?
Unfortunately, the debate has been hijacked by academics who have not read the judgment, nor do they know the law. I'm sorry to say. I've heard some of the debates. The judgment recites not just speeches, but a whole evidence, and right now, believe me, a bail judgment does not go into the evidence in detail. The judges must have seen material on the basis of which they have recorded a finding that there was a larger conspiracy being planned. The speeches were a part of that. So I don't know how this free speech debate has come to occupy front and center. See, you cannot vivisect a conspiracy to commit a sedition, to commit a revolt against the state by threatening to break up the state, by inciting communal violence, etc., with the sole intent to disrupt the state. If that is the plan, and then everything which is a part of the conspiracy becomes an unlawful act, you cannot dissect them and say, this is a lawful act. If I drive in my car lawfully within speed limits to commit a crime, and my going to a particular place, my travel, my actions, which may otherwise be innocent in themselves, if they are part of a larger conspiracy, then they all become actionable. So please understand, we are talking of a conspiracy to commit a crime. You can't say, oh, but there was only a speech. Who said that the Supreme Court has denied them bail only because they gave speeches? This is an Unlawful Activities Act which has been applied, not the provisions relating to sedition,
Okay.
Speech.
Then do you see this as a direct echo of the 2020, what was seen as tukre tukre sloganeering that implicated Umar, Khalid and Sharjeel Imam? And how should the authorities then respond to prevent any escalation?
I do not know what exactly happened in JNU. Even the news reports are as general can be. I don't think the news reports suggest, and I could be wrong, and I'll be very sorry if I'm wrong because this is terrible, but the news report suggests that there are some students. We've seen this happen when the Parliament attack death penalty was given. We saw students there in this very university saying, I mean, I hope I'm wrong, but this is what I've seen in news reports saying, Bharat tere tukde honge, and hum sharminda hai, tere qatil zinda hai. You know, this kind of thing which goes on. So these people, what is being taught in these universities, do not have faith in the executive government, do not have faith in your elected representatives, do not have faith in any institutions. And this India, the idea of India must be destroyed. Now, if this is what is being taught in this university, then I think it's a very serious matter which goes way beyond free speech.
Okay, sir, I have just enough time for my last question. So, Mr. Salve, don't you think that such cases only add fuel to the fire? Why not let it die down its own death?
You're absolutely right, Maria. These, as I started by saying, if there is a problem within the university, it must be confined to the walls of the campus. But that doesn't mean that there is no problem with the university. There is a serious problem with the university, and this needs to be fixed. If the problem is beyond that of the university, if the police has reason to believe that there are external influences which are using the university to stir up trouble and using these students to stir up trouble, and the students have ties or nexus with outside forces, then it takes a completely different view. So we do not know what's going on there. But if it is only misguided students, we need to fix the university that is creating this kind of hate in these minds. But if there is something more, and my suspicion is there is a lot more, this has become the playground of negative politics and Naxal politics.
All right, Harish Salve, thank you for your time. Thank you so much for joining us. And joining me now is former Law Minister, senior Congress leader, and a senior advocate of the Supreme Court who represented one of the key accused in the Delhi 2020 riot cases, that is Mr. Salman Khurshid. Mr. Khurshid, really appreciate your time. As a counsel of the accused, Shifaur Rahman, who got the bail, while he was among those 5 who got the bail, there were 2 others who did not get the bail. How do you view sloganeering which happened in JNU soon after the verdict, the anti-Modi chants post the verdict? Does this risk repeating the context and course of conduct issues the Supreme Court in fact highlighted in rejecting the bail?
Well, the Supreme Court didn't just go by any public reaction, and it never does. It never does. It may be sensitive to public response, as it did, for instance, in the matter of removing stray dogs from the streets of Delhi. There are sometimes environmental issues like the issue relating to Aravali. It may be taking a sense about how public response has come, but generally it remains unconcerned about any local reactions, etc., because they have to take things in their stride and go by the law of the land. So I don't imagine that something like this will disrupt in any manner anything that is happening in the Supreme Court. But having said that, let me just say that our response to what the Supreme Court does and decisions that it takes has to be obviously very, very, very careful. The Supreme Court never says that you can't be critical of the Supreme Court decisions, but some kind of decorum and some sort of appropriate behavior is called for. But that's really for us to decide as people. Our conscience permits or not, because ultimately we are damaging an institution. If at all, we are damaging an institution that is of critical importance to our democracy and to our rights for them to prevail according to the Constitution.
Since you say that the Supreme Court is okay with the idea of its judgment, one being critical of Supreme Court's judgment, but with the right decorum, do you see this, what happened in JNU, in the domain, how do you see this in the domain of free speech versus hate speech? Is this free speech or hate speech?
The attempts that have been made in this judgment itself, and indeed in many other judgments, are basically to try and draw a line between the right to dissent, protest, the right to free speech, and of inciting violence. that there is a critical difference between the two. Now, if we are very finicky and we are very touchy, then every word that is of a slightly strident nature will be treated as being offensive and offending. There are many liberal scholars and important scholars of the Constitution across the world who talk about the right to offend being part of the right of free speech. There are many others who believe that you shouldn't be able to defend people, and I think the Indian context, generally people believe that offensive language is unacceptable in the Indian context. But be that as it may, constitutionally, the level to which you can go has to be carefully monitored. How much of a tough expression you can give to something where you feel very strongly is something that the courts have to monitor, and then they lay down some parameters which we have to respect.
Okay, then can words like kabru, which essentially means grave, be thrown around in the guise of not meaning it literally?
Well, that's a very good question that you've asked, that things are said and you can't take a literal meaning of what is said from time to time. You have to see whether there is a metaphor involved, and I guess there is a metaphor involved here. But as I said, there's an Indian context. In Indian context, showing black flags, for instance, in Indian context is taken as a matter of great wrongdoing. Similarly, what you say is often taken as a matter of great wrongdoing. But it's very, very difficult in the law of the land to be able to pin responsibility on somebody for a thing like this. And if at all it is pinned, the responsibility is pinned on somebody, on appeal, sometimes that matter doesn't stand. So the statement that one often hears is that sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never harm me, is something that we should seriously consider, that you can't be oversensitive about words that are spoken. But at the same time, I think there is some element of courtesy and good behavior that we expect, particularly of those people who can influence young minds, etc. So that good behavior is expected, but you don't turn it into a criminal culpability. Saying that good behavior is expected of you cannot be equated with, and if there is lack of good behavior, then that would be treated as criminal culpability. I think that's going too far.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Khurshid, then how do you view that universities can't be curtailing the liberty of its own students? Here, the setting is a university, a campus.
Well, as I said, it has to be contextual. Good behavior and decent behavior and living within certain parameters at any institutions where the standards of that institutions are to be respected is very important. But that cannot be made as an excuse for not letting people speak their minds. A lot of people say that if you feel strongly, then you have to express strongly as well. This is what a lot of people who believe in liberty say. A lot of people say that, no, you can say what you want to say, but do say it in proper words, in careful words, etc. Now, these are two views. There are two views, and people can take sides, and ultimately somebody has to judge which is the correct view, and that obviously the judge has to be an appropriate court when this matter comes up.
All right, Mr. Khurshid, really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. And that's all from me on this edition of the News Track. We are putting out those two interviews on our website and also on the YouTube channel. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll be seeing you tomorrow.